Okay, I've got 9 o'clock. Welcome, everybody. All set, Grace? All set. Okay. Good morning and welcome to the June 21st meeting of the Merrimack Trustees of Trust Funds. I'm Chris Christensen. To my right is
Kathy Schur, alternate.
Paul Calabria, Finance Director.
and to my left.
Liz Petrides, trustee.
Bill Wilkes, trustee.
Thank you all. First order of business is the minutes of May 23rd. Do we have a motion?
I motion we accept the minutes of May 23rd, 2024.
I'll second.
Any discussion, corrections, omissions, additions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
300. Okay, so next item is on the portfolio, a review, just to come back to the presentation that we had last month from Cambridge Trust. I did bring my copy, I don't know if you did or not, but if there are questions or discussions or anything that anybody wants to bring up from that, we meet again with them scheduled in November. So if there are items, we can bring them up in the interim just by regular communications. And I don't know if anybody had anything.
The items I had, we discussed that day, so I
Okay.
don't have any additional items today.
All right, I don't have anything either. We'll come to the investment policy in a few minutes, which they had some input for. And the training meeting, I was unable to log in, but I'm hearing that some of it is what I've heard before, but Kathy certainly said she enjoyed it and got a lot out of it, so maybe you want to give us a rundown on what the highlights were.
Sure. I did enjoy it. I've been to a lot of, continuing legal education things and what have you, and I thought that they did a really good job with this program. It was in sort of three sections. They did a case study section with the AG's office, which was pretty interesting. They talked a little bit about investment policy, and they gave some examples of cities and towns that they think have pretty robust investment policies. So I'm going to check out a couple of those. I have with me Hanover and the city of Concord, just to compare what theirs are like to what ours is like and what we might want to do.
If you have digital copies of that and you want to send them out, that would be,
I don't, but I
Interesting.
certainly can when I get home do that.
okay, good, thank you.
They were asked about, is there some sort of best practices template that towns and cities can use? And they were like, no, there really isn't. So that wasn't terribly helpful. It kind of leaves people on their own. Another big section was right to know, and that was done by Stephen Buckley and Jonathan Cowell from Municipal Association. And that was interesting to me, to know what you can and can't do inside and outside of public session. So I liked that a lot. And then there was a lot of talk about, they did a whole section on cemetery trust funds. And they had a cemetery person there to talk about that. It was interesting, but not terribly relevant to us. But overall, I thought they did a nice job.
Anybody else have comments? Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't attend this year. I wasn't able to attend, but that sounds familiar to the session I had joined.
Yeah, I figure once you've done it once or twice, you know the routine. To me, it was good because I had never done it before.
Well, I think they spend a lot of time, the last time I went, they spent a lot of time on right to know. And once you've heard that, you pretty much get the gist of it. However, I used to get it 3 or 4 times a year from different organizations. And the town used to sponsor, I think we've changed attorneys now, but after the April election, someplace in June, the town would sponsor a right to know session for all of the people who are on our various boards and committees. I think the thrust of it, for most of us, is you can't have, there are ways to do it, but you shouldn't have meetings and solicit opinions or discussion on email, for example. And obviously, you can't conduct business not in public. You have to pre-announce meetings and locations and invite the public and all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty basic, but it's a good refresher. The other thing that affects us indirectly is non-public meetings. And I've gone through this over the years and really can't find much of anything that would be non-public for us. We don't do much in terms of negotiating with unions, and we don't buy and sell land, so there aren't those kinds of things that, say, the town council would do. So we're pretty much public. But thank you for the feedback, and I'll look forward to seeing those other investment policies. Next item on the agenda is the MVD meeting. I was invited, or we were invited, but I went to the MVD meeting 2 days ago, Monday night, 3 days ago now, and just gave them an overview of what we do and what we had for money. Now, they get a monthly report from us, and their treasurer or finance director reports on that. But they were interested in our investment strategy with capital reserve funds and what other monies might be available. The one that's always in question is the Shed Harris Fund, which was given to the town for fire protection in the village of Reed's Ferry. And we're never quite sure what that means, because when it started, Reed's Ferry had its own water system. They had a water tank up on Harris Ave and on, and that was kind of all put together. In 1955, when we formed the MVD, they took all of that stuff over. So the question was, does the money go to the town if they want to do something, or to the MVD if they want to do something? And neither of them have ever come to us with a plan and said, we'd like to do this so we have anything to make a decision on. So that one kind of sits in limbo, but they were interested in that and how it might fit in, but they don't have a project in mind that they want to request money for at this point, so.
Didn't we get a legal opinion on that a while back? Time flies, but didn't we ask what we could do with that money, and they basically told us that we had to use it for Reed's Ferry, something in Reed's Ferry? Because I know that we discussed, like, if the town bought a fire engine and it could service Reed's Ferry, but it could also service the rest of the town, is that acceptable with the bequest?
Well, that's,
And I thought
I got that information from Dave Johnson, who was my predecessor. And he said they asked for money for a fire engine once, and he said if you can't use it only in Reed's Ferry, you can't have the money. And then they went out and bought Indian pumps. Well, Indian pumps you can put on your back and you carry wherever you want to go. So I've never really been involved in legal opinions on that stuff. That's the history as I hear it secondhand over a cup of coffee. But you're right, that's an issue that comes up. And I think if there were a significant question, this is what I told the MVD, that if there's a request, that it probably would need to be best worked out between the town and the MVD, and that a probate judge would be probably the final decision maker. Now, if the town wanted to spend money fix them up on the Reed's Ferry Fire Station, I think that would be pretty clear. And they've talked about that every once in a while, but they've never done any of it, and it's a critter home right now. So, anyway, that's the MVD meeting. Investment policy. We have draft copies. Of some suggestions for minor changes. These were language suggestions that came from Cambridge Trust following the requests that we have made during the last year. When we talked about a certain portion of the common income fund being used for growth as well as dividends. And I think at the time we said 10%, they plugged in 15%, but you can see that in the draft language. And if anybody has thoughts on that, this is the time to do the wordsmithing, and then we'll have a final copy put together for approval at our August meeting. The other question I had on that issue was, well, as an example, we have the Quimby Fund, and the bequest specifies that no more than 50% of the fund can be invested in equities. So there's an algorithm at Cambridge Trust that sets off alarms when they get up to 45, 48%, and they'll rebalance whenever. My thought is if you're doing some growth investing and it happens to be successful, then all of a sudden you go beyond that 15% and alarm bells go off, and now all of a sudden you have to start selling stuff that might have dropped in value tomorrow or the next day. My thought was to whether or not we should put a rebalance schedule in there for an annual rebalance every June or something. Just an open thought.
So we all know that NVIDIA, Apple, Microsoft are all gonna go to infinity. And, you know, that's gonna be what we're gonna look at forever. But I don't know, I'm not overly comfortable with 15%. I think it should be like 10%. Because I think there's a lot of what we define as growth now has had explosive growth, and I'm not sure that it's gonna continue forever. So I don't wanna be trapped like a lot of people get trapped with the lemming syndrome, and we're all following the crowd because, you know, it's been heydays forever, and
On that issue, I was wondering when Cambridge Trust was doing their presentation, what is long-term in their analysis? It seems like they talk in terms of like 2 years being long-term, and that sounds a little
Short.
short. Yeah.
I think they think 2 to 5 years. I
2 to
think
5.
5 years is their outside
Okay.
look. That doesn't mean they're gonna sell everything that's 5 years old,
No.
but I think they tend to look at the 5-year mark as being, we can't see any more than 2 weeks ahead anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the outside parameter for their look-see. And there's certainly,
I think also at times, and this is my opinion, but I think at times Cambridge Trust, probably true with any trust department or whatever, that they have a stock, let's call it a stock evaluator person or group, and they look at these portfolios, and sometimes they feel like they need to do a trade to justify their existence, because we've had experiences where they've traded in and out of different stocks that are, let's just for sake of example, and this may not apply to us, but they'll sell Procter and Gamble and they'll buy Kimberly-Clark, two similar type of companies, and you say, well, why did you do that? Why did you sell Procter and Gamble and you bought Kimberly-Clark? You know, and if you looked at their background and you looked at the fundamentals of both of those companies, they're very similar. And I just have this opinion that sometimes they trade for this because they have these people that are, that's their job. Their job is to look at portfolios and make trade recommendations. And again, I'm not picking on Cambridge Trust because it's probably true with Fidelity and other people that manage money too. But you can't have these people sitting around doing nothing. They gotta make suggestions, right?
well, I think there was a period of time when, I'll pin it on Eric because he was the lead investment manager for us. They were trying to walk a tightrope of balancing sectors, and so they were changing some stuff, and I think there was one instance that Bill pointed out where they sold something and bought it back 3 months later or less at a higher price. We did call them on the carpet. Their president from New Hampshire, their chief investment officer from Boston, and the rest of the regular team. I think there were 8 people showed up. Please, we want you to love us. And all of a sudden, the trading stopped and it leveled out again, and we continue to be happy. We were happy with the fact that they responded well to our considerations. And overall, I think they've done a good job for us. But I think Bill has a good point that there were times when somebody says, you know, if I don't do something, they'll think I'm not doing my job. And we tend to be, well, in the investment policy, it says we have a perpetual horizon. So that's kind of the focus.
I mean, we haven't had a growth percent until we've recently discussed this. So if we're going theoretically from 0 to some percent, do we want to go 0 to 15? Or no, would it 10% be a significant number in itself?
Yeah, I think 10% is a good number to land on. I mean, the other good thing is this isn't set in stone, right? We're gonna review it again next year. We can have this conversation again and say, does 10% still make sense, or does it make sense to come up or down from that number?
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking, like,
Yeah.
we can review it a year
Yeah.
from now and say, hey, that 10% really did well.
Yep.
And you guys selected growth companies beyond what we were expecting. You did a great job, so maybe we bump it to 15%. Or conversely, it didn't do well, why didn't it do well?
Right.
And we're not, you know, jeopardizing
Yep.
our investments.
Anybody else? All right, well, go for 10% by consensus?
Yep.
Is that
I'd agree
agreeable
to
to
that.
everybody?
Yep, I agree.
And do we want to put in anything that says time frame for rebalancing? I mean, there are times in my mind where
I don't get that.
We'll use NVIDIA as an example, and it skyrockets, which it has this last year. So now, because of that growth, without, or by default, we've gone over the 10%. Do we want to just reevaluate that on an annual basis, or every time we go over that 10%?
That's a little bit tricky.
It
I
is,
mean,
that's why I'm questioning it.
If they bought a growth company, let's, for sake of discussion, let's say it was a drug company and they came up with a cure for some kind of cancer, and the thing, or like, I guess a good current example is Eli Lilly with their Wegovy or whatever they call it. I mean, and that probably would bump you way up beyond your balanced calculation. You know, is it time to sell Eli Lilly to rebalance, or should you continue the ride? I think you almost have to handle it on you have to have maybe a trigger point and then a discussion. I'm not sure you should just all of a sudden rebalance because you hit a trigger point. Does that make sense?
But maybe you're triggering a discussion,
Right.
yeah. The potential for a rebalance.
Got some language you like?
No, I'm just thinking this on the top of my head, but, what would you
What if you
consider
had
to
like
be?
what if you had like a 2% delta, and you said, hey, if the growth goes over 2% above our target, we want to, have a trigger point and have some discussion or something.
We could say 10% not to exceed 15.
But what happens when it exceeds 15?
You gotta sell something.
Do they call us, or do?
No, they're the managers. We don't have the ability to act instantaneously.
But if you say 10% not to exceed 15, does that just give them the authority to have it at 13%?
Yeah, that seems like,
That seems
That's
like an
too hard.
open,
yeah.
Okay?
What is it that we're trying to accomplish here? That if it exceeds a certain percentage point, then automatically we've got to
rebalance.
rebalance because of a potential problem.
Well, we have to
Then
prudently
why?
manage this stuff.
Right, and they're saying 15%?
Well, they just suggested that.
No, but I mean, if we're looking at 10% as being a good number, and they're saying 15%, then you start to think about, we've got to rebalance. If you said that, how would you trigger that? Something between 10 and 15%, you'd start to take a closer look at it, but not necessarily trigger a rebalance.
I think Bill, I agree with you on this one. I think if you start saying between or up to 15, I think it needs to be a bit more strict here.
Structured.
Yes, like I would say plus or minus 2% from that guidance should be what triggers. And again, I don't know what the language you would want to put in, but should trigger a reaction from the trust manager to reevaluate or something like that.
Well, you wanna just go with the 10% and leave out the question of rebalancing for now?
We can. Do we need to discuss with Cambridge what they would do? Like, let's give them the hypothetical. What would you do? How would you react? What's the time frame on it that you would respond? What communications would come out on that?
We can do that.
I mean, we have a strict policy with the Quimby Fund, which is relatively smaller, but we've never really had a strict rebalancing policy that I'm aware of. And that you know, if you looked at like utilities versus, consumer goods versus technology, we've never really had a strict policy on how much of any of those you would have as a percent of your portfolio.
Yeah, we discussed that a little bit last time when we were talking about Rio Tinto versus Best Buy,
Right.
that they weren't following a strict sector balance.
And we don't wanna handcuff these guys either,
Right.
because we're giving them the responsibility to manage the portfolios and meet certain investment goals. If we put too much balancing in there, it may be a negative thing, because if they say, well, you know, Town of Merrimack wants so much in consumer goods and so much in utilities versus technology or whatever, it might not be the right segments to be in at a given time. So I'm a little nervous about, you know, putting too many restrictions on what they can do.
All right, so let's just leave it at the 10% and,
I mean, we meet with them
Let's get
enough
this-
that we can question it, can't we?
yep,
If we meet with them twice a year, and they say, hey, growth is now 13%, they can tell us why it's 13%, and we can say, well, you need to, you know, get that back down to 10%.
well, the percent is gonna be a fluctuating number anyway,
Right.
based on what the performance of the entirety is. So, I think we go for the 10%. Has everybody agreed to that? We'll vote on it actually, in August. But I will change the draft paperwork for that. And that's what we will vote on in August. Is that acceptable to everybody?
Yes.
Is there anything else in here we want to review or change?
Nothing from me.
Kathy? Bill?
No.
Okay. Moving on, bills and correspondence. I got a bill from the Merrimack Flower Shop for the cemetery flowers for $130. We paid it.
That didn't seem like it had much inflation.
No, it was $118.50 last year. And I passed out the town capital reserve fund request.
That number is bigger than what we expected the last meeting.
Yeah, by $600,000.
Which I believe, Mr. Chair, you actually said, oh, you should probably say at least two. So,
So the number is $2,126,145.73. Did I read that correctly?
I think so.
$2,126,145.73.
Do we have a motion?
Where's this? This is coming from the capital reserve fund?
Yes, per that list that,
And
We
this
just
is
handled it.
exact? We don't, there's nothing else coming? No other emails? Okay. I'll make a motion to approve the transfer of $2,126,145.73 from the capital reserve funds for various expenditures listed.
okay.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
3-0-0. Annual organization. I think we're required by either bylaws or statute to appoint among ourselves some places it says bookkeeper, some places it says secretary, and we've used the word chairman in the past. I'm willing to continue. If somebody else wants to assume the duties, then we can discuss and change.
I'm not
I
interested.
nominate Chris Christensen
Great, me too.
as
I'll second.
chair or appropriate designation.
I guess that would be an all in favor. Thank you.
Aye.
Aye.
Upcoming meetings, August 23rd. It's late in the month, but we have to report in September for the investment policy and our annual reports that are being prepared. Do we have a date yet that the auditors are coming?
Date, I do. Audit. It's going to be in August. That's the pre-audit visit. August 26th.
Ah, okay.
Perfect timing, Chris.
So they won't be finishing up till sometime in September.
Correct.
Okay, so all our reports will have gone out by then. I don't have anything else related to the audit. And
September 20th, I will not be here. But now that we have an alternate,
will you be here on September 20th?
As far as I know, God willing.
I'll be here.
what a luxury, huh? Thank you, Kathy.
My pleasure.
Okay, do we have any other business that may properly come before us? No other business. Next item on the agenda is to adjourn. It is 9:37.
Motion to adjourn.
We are adjourned.